with our medical partnership program. The Foundation for Delaware County has been really fortunate the last 10 years to have a medical legal partnership program embedded in our services. So civil legal attorneys providing direct representation and guidance to our program participant clients using the national medical legal partnership model. And our real focus on those civil legal needs for our clients are around income supports, housing assistance, and utility assistance, as well as other kind of civil legal needs as they come up. Eileen has been a part of our program for about the last year. I think that sounds about right. Can't believe it. 1 year, this is almost the anniversary, and really is focused on the housing needs of Healthy Start and Nurse Family Partnership Program participants. She's also a member of the Delaware County Election Protection Committee, and so has really committed time and energy into making sure that we have fair elections in Delaware County. And that's where her interest in this information has come from. So we're going to be providing kind of a great accessible program. You're even going to hear about Justin Timberlake, right, as part of this. And so it's a great and accessible presentation. We hope that you will share the recording when it becomes available, and certainly share some of the information that Eileen is going to give us today with those people around you. So Eileen, I'm going to hand it to you to take away.
Great. Thanks so much, Alicia and Katie. We have a little bit of a session with lots of information. Hopefully for some of you, it's a review, but it's going to be a good reminder just to get your election hat focus and move forward over the next 3 months. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Alicia, is there a way that you could give me access to that? Because we do have some Justin Timberlake teasers in here, so we want to make sure we get those out to everyone.
You should be ready to go, Eileen.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You got it.
All right. Get you from the beginning. All right. So here we are. We're going to go through a little bit about what the Pennsylvania law is for voting and ways that you can all get involved in the election season here in Delaware County. For purposes of today, this is going to be hopefully very disciplined and nonpartisan. And so our aim here is to not sway you one way or the other, but just to really get everyone motivated and excited about being active participants in democracy and the ways that you can do that. My goal is not to convince you to vote one way or the other, but just simply to vote and make sure everyone around you also is doing the same thing. And with that, we'll get started. So here's our agenda, what we're looking to cover today, why voting matters, our important dates and deadlines, how you can actually go about casting your ballot in November, what your rights are at the ballot box, and then ways to get involved. I should mention that we are 85 days away from November 8th, so approximately 3 months, and we are, about to be the epicenter of the election season here in Pennsylvania. So you will, I'm sure if you haven't already, you'll feel increased energy as we hurdle towards that election day in November. First and foremost, why do we vote? Why is it important? We live in a representative democracy. Our whole ability to self-govern depends on voting. And if we don't do that, then we lose our voice and we give it away to those who may not be representative of our interests. And I think when Alicia introduced us today, she talked about intervening in systems, and there's no more direct way that you can intervene in a system twice a year than with your ballot. For any independents, you can only do that in certain instances, but you can absolutely do it once a year. And so more voting equals more accountability for our elected officials. Yes, and I'm going to pause here for a minute. That's a great question I saw in the chat. Everyone will get a copy of the slides. There's lots of info in here. I have links and resources, so don't feel like you need to take notes. Don't just kind of let it wash over you for now. So thank you for that question. That was a good one. Yeah, so how do we hold our elected officials accountable if we don't vote, right? If no one goes to the polls, they're going to think they're doing a great job and they just keep going down the course that they're going. And at that point, no one has any say differently. And the last point I want to emphasize, and I give this a little bit probably short shrift, but it really is a burden for lots, or a hurdle for lots of people to overcome when they're thinking about voting. Why should I vote? I'm only one person. I'm only one vote. It doesn't matter. Things are, create huge numbers. How can my one little vote matter? And so I'm going to give you 3 examples to get you motivated. First, Florida, in the Bush v. Gore election, Florida was determined by 556 votes. So when I'm not in the office today, but when I sit in my office building, about 500 people or so work there, right? So that could have determined the whole course of really decades of policy and the way, a direction of a country, right? Based on 500 and so odd votes. Second, in a 2014 Republican candidate, defeated a Democratic candidate in a House of Representatives seat in Massachusetts by just 10 votes, right? So 10 votes, 10 people will come up, and that would have changed who got that seat in that given year. And then in the last example, granted, scaling here is a little bit of an issue, but there was an Alaska state legislature seat where a Republican, Mike Kelly, beat out his Democratic opponent, Carl Castle, by just a single vote. So if you ever are on the fence or you interact with folks that are on the fence, literally single votes do matter in elections. And it's important that we keep that in mind and don't let the sheer numbers kind of make us less likely to get out there. So here's a little bit of a picture of what our Delaware County voters look like. I pulled some stats. So if anyone is as nerdy and as interested in elections as I am, you can go to the Department of State and they pull registration votes or registered voters on a weekly basis. So actually I'm a little sad because tomorrow's numbers come out. They come out on Tuesday. So we have last week's, but that's okay. And so you'll see currently in Delaware County, we have about 409,645 voters. That number is actually up by about 2,000 voters since the last time I gave this training about a week ago or a month ago. So we are heading in the right direction of more increased participation. And then I just wanted to point out quickly the last 2 kind of major general election cycles. 2020, Delaware County did a fantastic job. They were at 77% of our registered voters turned out to vote in the 2020 election. Unfortunately, that momentum did not carry through to 2021 when there was less kind of high profile elections happening and only about 36% came out. In some of the most active democracies, that number routinely is up above 80%. So we are at 88, 89%. So while we have should be very proud of ourselves with that 2020 number, election rights folks and voting rights folks would like to see that every election be upwards of 77%, not just our major presidential ones. And then if on the kind of right side of here of the screen, we see the breakdown of where that 409 number comes from. So the vast majority of the folks that we all kind of interact with in our services are parents with young kids, and though that is a huge percentage of the overall voting population in Delaware County for folks that are kind of in that range of having young kids. And so this is the area that we want to focus on. This is the area that we want to get beefed up. And I'll just mention briefly, in that 18 to 24 range, we need lots more of those folks registered. And I know that the county is doing lots of outreach in high schools, trying to get kids registered as they head into the election season, and the same thing with college kids. We don't want to let those folks that are heading off to college kind of slip through the cracks. So in Pennsylvania, all eyes will be on Pennsylvania for the next 3 months. They have been for a little while now, but everyone is riveted across the country because of what is at stake in Pennsylvania this year. So we will see an election for a US senator, your US representative. So I know our county, Delaware County, is broken up a little bit and has different districts, but your US rep is up for election. The Pennsylvania governor is up for election. The Pennsylvania lieutenant governor is up for election. And in Pennsylvania, there are actually 2 separate elections. There is a bill in the legislature now that will combine those, but for now, there are 2 separate elections. Our state senator is up, and and your state rep is also up. That is a good question, Bill. I'm getting a question on the breakdown of our voters about the language and cultural ethnic breakdown of Delaware County. I have not looked into that access, but I can make a note to see where we can run those numbers down and try and find out, because that's a really great question. And we do have some information later in the presentation about why it's important to access the ballot for specific language accessibility reasons. So that is a good question. And I unfortunately don't have that for you right now, but I will see what I can do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so here's why is everyone going to be on Pennsylvania, right? Because the Senate, currently the US Senate is broken down 50-50. And our seat in Pennsylvania, the current Senator Toomey's seat, if that goes to a different party, then that would shift the makeup of the US Senate and how things proceed through there. And so this is a very high stake. Same thing with Pennsylvania, or the governor is currently of a different party than our legislature. And so that provides a little bit of predictability in how legislation moves through our Pennsylvania state government. So if that changes, that could alter a different kind of landscape for legislation that's currently pending in the House and future legislation. I do want to make one quick note, and actually, Katie, I can thank you for this because you had a great question last time we did this training together. What is not on the ballot this year? So we may have seen lots of information circulating at the end of the last Pennsylvania legislative session about constitutional amendments that were passed through both the Pennsylvania House and Pennsylvania Senate. Those constitutional amendments regarding how elections are run in Pennsylvania and the abortion access, right to abortion in Pennsylvania, those will not appear on your November ballot. So those actually have to go through 2 consecutive sessions of the Pennsylvania legislature. So they have to pass in 2 consecutive sessions, and then they get to make their way to the ballot. So you will not see that now. The one thing that election watchers are paying attention to are, because those amendments have to pass through 2 consecutive sessions, the makeup of the legislature will just determine whether or not they pass. So that's kind of how those amendments tie into the current election season, but you will not see any those questions on your ballot. All right. So now we know everyone is paying attention to us. How do we actually go and vote? What dates do we have to pay attention to? So 15 days before the election, you have to make sure you're registered and or all of your information is up to date. So if you are working with folks that move a lot, or you move a lot, I went through that phase for about 15 years after college, and your polling place changes all the time. You need to make sure your information is updated with the Department of State. You also have on November 1st is the last day to apply for mail-in ballots. So we'll talk a little bit about mail-in ballots in a bit, but those are the last day that you can apply to receive one. And then of course, November 8th is election day. All ballots, mail-in ballots and in-person ballots, have to be cast by 8 p.m. So it's not enough that your mail-in ballot is postmarked on November 8th. It has to be actually returned to the possession of the Board of Elections by 8 p.m. on November 8th. All right. So how do we actually go about voting? We know why it's important. We know the stakes, but how do we go do it? First step, you have to make sure you're registered. This link here is live, and when we circulate these slides after the fact, you can go check there. For folks that are on this call, your homework right now is to go and check your voter registration status and remind yourself where your polling precinct is, and make sure all your information is up to date. And then do that with 3 other friends. That will start this momentum in the very near future. All right, and now you checked your registration, and unfortunately you are not registered. What do you do? So you need to have a couple requirements. First, you have to be a US citizen for at least 1 month before the next election. You have to be a resident of Pennsylvania for 30 days before the next election. And you have to be 18 or older on the day of the next election. So folks that have 17-year-olds circulating in your orbit, if they're going to turn 18 by November 8th this fall, get them registered to vote now. They can absolutely head to that link and get registered right now and be ready to go for November 8th. There's 3 ways to do it. The easiest and most accessible for lots of folks is the online registration. So you go ahead and type in some information there, and that goes through fairly quickly. For folks that don't have as easy internet access, we do have a paper ballot that the county supplies. And finally, any state government agency, you can register to vote there. So the DMV, the Government Services Building and Media, and any other state agency that you're interacting with. So, the welfare offices, I've been told that state stores have these registrations. I have not actually tested that theory. So if anyone is looking to pick up anything at the state stores in the next couple of weeks, go ahead and see if they have their proper registration materials there. All right, so various ways to actually cast your vote. The first one is by voting by mail. This was a huge sea change in voting accessibility here in Pennsylvania in 2019. This law, informally known as Act 77, passed with huge broad bipartisan support. So lots of folks on either side of the aisle found this to be a valuable tool in increasing election accessibility. It allowed no excuse mail-in ballot for the first time in Pennsylvania history. Prior to no excuse mail-in balloting, the only way that you could cast a ballot by mail was through absentee, and that had very narrow reasons for why you needed an absentee ballot. Here, anyone can do it for any reason. And so in 2020, so that number that we looked at where Delaware County had 77% turnout, and across the Commonwealth, 40% of all voters in the 2020 election cast their ballot through no excuse mail-in voting, which is a huge, huge win for increasing accessibility to the ballot box. And if you'll recall, in 2020, we were in the middle of the beginning of the pandemic, really. And so that allowed folks that did not have the ability to venture out in person to safely cast their ballot from the comfort of their own home. Election voting rights folks are huge proponents of voting by mail. It allows people with disabilities, people with young kids, people with strict work schedules, the ability to cast their ballot on their own terms and when is convenient for them. Particularly folks with young children, if anyone has, have to plan around nap schedules and daycare schedules and work schedules, it's much easier to just fill out that ballot on your own time, drop it in the mail or a drop box when you can, and then you've done your civic duty. So for anyone that has questions about mail-in voting, it is safe, it is secure, and it is convenient. And it is the way that many states across the United States, particularly in the West, have been doing their elections for a very long time. So this is not new and nothing to be concerned about here in Pennsylvania. It's a huge win for our voters. You may have seen that in the run up after the 2020 elections, we saw some movement on whether mail-in balloting was going to be legal here in Pennsylvania. So after the 2020 election, there was a litigation that challenged the constitutionality of that act. It was really about the way in which the legislature enacted Act 77. There was a dispute about whether or not it should have been done through constitutional amendment or through legislation. In January 2022, the kind of appellate court, the Commonwealth Court, found that the act was unconstitutional. The administration, Governor Wolf's administration, appealed to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, oh boy, this would be bad if we had to change it right away, because people were almost in election season here in March 2022. We're going to issue a stay, which means everything that was in place prior to the litigation is going to stay the way it is, and we'll move forward. And then thankfully, in the beginning of August, we got word from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that they upheld Act 77, meaning no excuse mail-in voting is constitutional in the Commonwealth. So I actually did this training with Katie in July 15th, and at that point we weren't sure what would happen. So now I can confidently say that there is no reason that anyone should be worried about requesting your mail-in ballot, because it is constitutional according to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And so how do you vote by mail? These are three, it's very easy, it's very self-explanatory, but it's good to have some good reminders here. You have to request your application. So Pennsylvania does not send voters who have voted by mail a ballot. You have to actually request it each election season. So if you are getting ballots, that is improper. If you're getting an application, that's one thing. But there is no procedure in place to automatically send folks that have requested a ballot by mail, unless they At every election request it. So go ahead and get your application in if you're interested in this method. You can return it by mail, and you can return it in person, or you can return it in a Dropbox. So you can bring it back to media, you can go to your local Dropbox, or you can put it in the mail. And then one quick note on voting by mail. We saw lots of commercials and ads about naked ballots in 2020 and making sure that everyone followed the rules about how to return your ballot. That is important. Make sure that you are following the instructions in your packet to make sure that your ballot counts. If you do not follow that procedure, there is a chance your ballot will not count. And we want to make sure that everyone's voice is heard in the election. So here is just a quick list of our Delaware County drop boxes. Drop boxes are convenient, they're safe, they're monitored by cameras for 24 hours a day. And so this is again, a huge sea change in accessing the right to vote here in Pennsylvania. Of that list there on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a couple of towns or municipalities in black bold. Those are places that do not have 24-hour access to your Dropbox. So they are only kind of generally business hours. And then the places in red, those are actually not operable as of the May primary. So we'll see if they will be back up and running for the November election. But as of now, they are not a place you can go to drop off your ballot. And one other quick note on dropping off ballots. You are not allowed in Pennsylvania to drop off someone else's ballot just to be a good friend or a friendly neighbor or a kind citizen. You actually do have to fill out a request for accessible remote ballot so that there's a paper trail that person had given you the authority to drop off their ballot on their behalf. You'll see this is kind of where the language, sometimes we hear it as ballot harvesting. That's where this language comes from. And we don't want to ever take someone else's ballot and just put it in that Dropbox without the proper paperwork in place. And then finally, again, if you return your ballot to a Dropbox by 8 p.m. on November 8th, your ballot will count. If at 8 p.m. they actually have folks that spread out all over the county to all of the Dropboxes, and they lock the box at 8 o'clock. So if you get there at 8:10, your ballot won't count, unfortunately. So we want to make sure that that ballot is returned early as possible. And one other quick note, you can't actually return your ballot to your polling place. That is not allowed. So we do see lots of folks on election day, even though we've been through this a few times now, where they get their mail-in ballot and they want to try and drop it off to their regular polling place. And that is not appropriate for these elections going forward. They did it for one time in the primary of 2020, but since then that is not permissible. So you have to actually return it to a county Dropbox. All right, so if you don't want to vote by mail, you like going in person. I know lots of folks that do this. They appreciate the time they spend and they enjoy that process, and that's great too. All voting is good voting. So however you prefer, a couple things to keep in mind when you're voting in person is the polls are open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. in Delaware County. If you are in line by 8 p.m., you have the right to cast your ballot. So what will happen if it's 7:55 and you're nervous, you get in line, you should see the judge of elections, who is the official in charge of each polling place, come out and be outside at 8 p.m. and he or she will mark the end of the line as of 8 p.m. And everyone who is ahead of that marker will be able to vote. Anyone who joins the line after that will be unfortunately turned away. So stay in line if you're there at 8 p.m. If that line means that you have to stay for 45 minutes because there's so many people there that were just skirting in under the deadline, that's okay. Everyone casts their ballot as long as you're in line by 8 p.m. If you are voting in person, Pennsylvania does not require photo ID every time you vote. Currently, there is legislation pending that may change that, but as of now, the law says that you do not need to show ID unless it is the first time voting in a particular location. So you are a brand new 18-year-old voter, it's the first time you're voting, you need ID, or you moved and now you're at a different polling place, you do need to show ID. It does not need to be photo ID. It can be if that's what you have. So a driver's license or a photo ID card from PennDOT, that's fine. A passport, a student ID, all of those things count. But it also can be your voter card. It can be a current utility bill, a bank statement, a paycheck, or a government check. And One quick note on voter ID for individuals that are transgendered, voting rights advocates typically recommend taking a non-photo form of ID if you are concerned that your ID does not match your outward presentation at the time you're going to vote. Our polling places are staffed with really great hardworking folks, but sometimes they're busy and don't stay up to date on everything and are confused and overwhelmed. And so if you think that will be a problem for a transgendered loved one, friend, client, anyone, the idea there would be to think about bringing a non-photo ID just for ease of processing. In person in Delaware County, you will vote on a paper ballot using a pen and you will run it through a scanner. This is a big change and people don't really like it. Some people like it, some people don't. Some people think it brings them back to like college entrance exams and state standardized tests. And it can be burdensome if it's a long ballot. So you really want to think about that as you're going in to cast your ballot, that you might be there for a little while. The reason that the county changed from those machines with the big green button, for folks that have been voting for a while, it was to increase security, to increase paper trail, and to make sure that they are protecting against any outside influence that could hack those old machines that were susceptible to interference. And finally, the paper ballot allows for auditing for folks if they do need to perform an election audit. And the last thing, and this can happen through no one's fault, everyone is working hard on election day trying to do their best, but sometimes the machine's broke and your line is getting really long and nothing's moving. The rule of thumb is if more than half of the machines in a given precinct are not operating, you have the ability to request an emergency paper ballot. So they should offer you a ballot right away. So in this instance, that scanner that you run your ballot through is not functioning properly. You have the ability to cast your paper ballot in a way that allows you to get in and out. Broken machines actually are an infringement of the right to cast your ballot free of interference or undue burden. So we want to make sure that if everyone's paying attention to the machine issue, if you see a really long line, one of the first questions to ask is, are the machines working? All right. One question that we get a lot from both in the polls and for people that are just curious about the voting process. Sammy requested their ballot by mail and they changed their mind. And I will admit that I actually did this. I changed my mind last time. I wanted to go in person. And so I brought my whole ballot, everything that was mailed to me. I gathered up all the materials. You bring it back to your polling place and you say you'd like to turn in your mail-in ballot. The election worker will do what they call spoiling it, which is essentially they just are making a notation that you have correctly given everything back. They're going to ask you to sign an affidavit that says, yes, I'd like to change my mind. And then you go ahead and cast your ballot as you would regularly. If for some reason you lost one of the pieces of that package that the election board mailed to you, you can cast your ballot provisionally. Provisionally is a type of voting that essentially gives the election board or the county election officials the ability to do a double check to say that you are who you say you are and that you are voting properly. So it just takes a little bit of time to actually cast that or to have that ballot count. So that is not, and so I'm getting a question. It's a really, really great question. And so the question is for if you are voting in person and the machines are broken, and then you ask for the emergency ballot, is that considered a provisional? It should not be considered a provisional under Pennsylvania law at that point. It is just a regular ballot. And we have seen that in our polling places where when we initially transitioned from the old machines to the new scanner style, we had whole machines that didn't work for whole precincts. And so those are not technically provisional ballots. So that's a different procedure. In a provisional ballot, when you are casting a ballot that way, or your judge of election offers you a provisional, you'll be given a ticket and you can take that ticket home and follow the life of your provisional ballot. So make sure if you are offered a provisional, do not leave without that ticket, because that ticket is your ability to track whether or not your ballot counted. And so on the elections county board side of things, they have a list of all of the folks that did cast their ballot provisionally, and you're able to go ahead and follow the life of that provisional ballot along. Great question, Katie. So this is a product of the time. So Katie asks that given kind of the state of where we are, what can you do if you're planning to vote in person, but you have COVID or other contagious illnesses? There is a mechanism in Delaware County to request an emergency mail-in ballot, and that is on the Delaware County Board of Elections site. And I forget the time off the top of my head, but I will check that. But you can request day of to get an emergency ballot and do it by absentee, essentially. So that is absentee for whatever reason, Pennsylvania is still classifying them that way. But there is a mechanism that if you need a change of plans, something came up, you can go ahead and request an emergency ballot and they will go through that way. Just a quick note, one time in COVID, we saw lots of crazy things, and on the election protection side of things, the goal is to make sure that everyone casts their ballot fairly and freely, and lots of all kinds of wonky things popped up. And we did have an individual who from their car was yelling, "I'm COVID positive, I want to vote, how do I vote?" And we actually, through the judge of elections, they did allow that person to vote from their car with lots of PPP on, and bring it back. And they had sent 2 poll watchers to make sure everything was handled properly. But people generally, the goal is to make sure everyone can vote. So I say that because people can get pretty creative, and if everyone's on the same page about making sure that individuals have access to the ballot, it works out much smoothly in each polling place. Okay, so in Pennsylvania, or Delco specifically, you might hear about voting early, and Pennsylvania doesn't have a traditional voting early mechanism. So if anyone can recall, in the last presidential election, you may have seen lines of cars in Texas driving by before election day, and where folks are actually casting a ballot like they would on election day. Pennsylvania, the only way you can cast your ballot early is by the no excuse mail-in ballot mechanism. So if you decide that you have some paid time off and you'd like to go take care of your election duties, you can go to media, to the government center building. You can ask for a mail-in ballot, apply for it. They will hand you one right there on the spot. You can mark it and hand it back to them, and you've done your civic duty all in one trip. And that is considered early voting. This Department of State does have another link where you can track your mail-in ballot. So whether it's received or it's sent out to you, if they get it back, and then if it has been counted. And so that's a really nice thing, to be able to do it all in one day if possible, or track it if you are in the traditional mail-in ballot way. All right, so now we know how we can vote. We know the options we have for election day, but what do we do in terms of preserving our voting rights? And so we're going to touch on some really kind of overview topics that are common in precincts. I don't want to say in Delaware County, because I don't necessarily believe that all of these are very, very common, but they are. When voting rights violations pop up, these are kind of the buckets that they fall in. First and foremost, every voter in the United States and in Pennsylvania has the ability to be free from intimidation or harassment when they cast their ballot. Voter intimidation and/or any discriminatory conduct is illegal under both the federal statutory scheme and Pennsylvania law. Any activity that threatens, harasses, intimidates, or is intended to intimidate constitutes voter intimidation. The Department of State doesn't have an exhaustive list of everything that they find discriminatory or intimidating. And that's probably a good thing, because I don't think they want to try and guess all the ways that people could be messing with your right to vote. But they have seen some common instances, and those are, for example, a gauntlet of people leading up to the door where you go into your precinct to vote. So sometimes even best intentions people want to give you information about voting and want to be helpful to try and inform your vote. But if those folks are kind of making it so that you have to run through a gauntlet to get to the door, that constitutes voter intimidation. And one of the fastest ways to deal with that, the most or the least kind of adversarial, is just talk to your judge of election when you get inside. Say that folks are outside or really lining up by the door. It made me feel uncomfortable. That judge of election has the obligation to go and talk to the folks outside to make sure that that doesn't continue. Other examples are fake check-in tables, where sometimes either candidates or parties will set up a table outside of the precinct and ask the folks as they approach the polling place to see their paperwork or see their ID or talk to them about what their plan to vote is. That's not appropriate. It's illegal. And if you see any of those outside check-in tables, you should not at all visit them. Just keep on heading right into your polling place. Another example of discriminatory conduct that we see are folks that do not speak English as their first language. And a lot of times they'll be asked to repeat information loudly outside, in inappropriate ways. So share their address really loudly for everyone in the polling place to hear, or be dealt with in a threatening manner because whoever it is that's continuing this conduct is hoping to dissuade them from casting their ballot. Again, if there's any of this activity that you see, report it to your judge of elections. You can also report it to the district attorney's office. Has a task force that they've been running for the election cycles in the past. And the Department of State also tracks intimidation or harassment and refers to the Attorney General's office if appropriate. One other little rule of thumb that is just helpful that every judge knows is that no one can be electioneering, which means handing out voter information or political information within 10 feet of that door to the polling place. So there's supposed to be a good 10 feet barrier where that no one is supposed to talk to you, no one hands you anything, that you should feel free to go in without any influence. If no one is abiding by that, make sure you mention it to your judge of elections. And this happens a lot. And this is, the judge is supposed to go out and set a line before the day starts. But sometimes that everyone's in agreement and they don't need to, and it's not a big deal, but sometimes they really need to hold that line a little bit more carefully. So one thing to look out for as you're going, that 10-foot rule is really easy to see. One other right that you have is not anyone can just walk in and challenge your ability to cast your ballot. There's very few instances in Pennsylvania law that allows someone to challenge a voter's right to vote. And those people that can issue a challenge are a poll worker, a poll watcher, or another voter, but only for two reasons. One, residency. They're saying you don't live where you are supposed to be voting, or two, that you aren't who you say you are. In the event that you are challenged or you see someone who's challenged, there is a procedure for the way that should operate. That voter can still go ahead and vote normally if they sign an affidavit and they have a person to vouch for them. So they call mom and say, "Mom, they're saying that I am not who I say I am. Can you vouch for me?" And then that judge should absolutely should overrule the objection and issue a ballot as if nothing happened. If for whatever reason you can't get a hold of someone, or you are seeing a voter that can't get a hold of someone to vouch for them, they have the right and ability to cast a provisional ballot, and they should not leave that polling place until they get a provisional ballot and cast their vote that way. Just real quickly, some other instances of provisional ballot might come into play. We talked one about if you don't have your full mail-in ballot packet, but also for whatever reason your name is not in the book. It could be a misprint. It could be just an oversight, and you voted at this precinct for ages, you've never moved and your name is not there, request a provisional ballot. Also, if you don't have ID for whatever reason, but you go ahead, this is the only chance you have to get out to vote that day, cast a provisional ballot. And then the folks on the County Board of Elections will verify your identity on the back end. But provisional ballots are wildly important, and it's really important that everyone in a given polling place is on the same page about making sure they get issued one if you have the right to one. All right, language accessibility, and I know we got a question about this earlier in the presentation, but this is really important because federal law requires every county in the United States to provide election services and information in another language when the population of voting age people who speak that language reaches a certain size. And so in Delaware County, they offer very similar languages that the state of Pennsylvania offers, which are Spanish, Simplified Chinese, Traditional Chinese, and Vietnamese. If there's a language that you can't find accessible materials in, the Delaware County Board of Elections likely has those. You just have to contact them on behalf of someone else, but they are required by federal law to supply them in other languages. And similarly, if you are if you are a limited English proficient speaker, you can actually go ahead and choose someone to go into the booth with you and help you read the ballot and cast your vote that way. It's similar to if you have a physical disability that is prohibiting you from either seeing the ballot or operating a pen or something like that, that this is a way to increase accessibility. And so every person should have that right. There's a couple buckets of people that are not allowed to serve as that support, and we'll talk about them next, but we just keep in mind that the fundamental right to increase the access to the ballot is there, and that should not be infringed. In both for disability rights, Pennsylvania and federal law, everyone has to have a voting system that is accessible to voters with a disability. If you cannot enter the voting booth or use the voting system due to a disability, you can select someone to help you. And that's similar to the language issue. If you choose a support person, the people that it cannot be are your employer or their agent, your union rep or their agent, or the judge of elections in a given precinct. So those are the three types of folks that it cannot be, but a spouse, a friend, a church member, a neighbor, everyone, that all counts as long as they are also not one of these other three areas. You do need to fill out a declaration of need of assistance. So it's just a quick form that the judge offers you, you sign it, and then that's the only time you'll need it going forward in that precinct. If you change your precinct, you'll need to fill out the form again, but if you are living in a precinct and you vote there frequently, you only need to do it once. I'm just going to take a quick minute to share a personal note. My mother suffered a stroke before the 2020 election season. And while she had the ability to have a support person with her, because she lost vision in some of her eyes and her vision was kind of fuzzy, and she had a hard time navigating the actual polling place, she was very grateful that the mail-in option existed for her, because she was able to kind of see the ballot in her own time and was maintaining the dignity of voting. Even though support people are great, and that's a fantastic way to assist access, sometimes the mail-in ballot just gives a little bit more privacy and comfort to folks that are in this group that may otherwise need support. And the last kind of major right here is those with a criminal record. Pennsylvania had some litigation about whether or not certain groups of convictions would interfere with the right to vote. The Commonwealth Court ruled that yes, some convictions allow or continue to not allow a person to vote, but most of them you can still cast your ballot. So the only groups that are not eligible to vote with a criminal record are someone who is in prison or jail because of a felony conviction and who will not be released before the election, or someone that has been convicted of violating election laws in the past 4 years. So we probably should not allow those folks to a way to access the ballot. But if 4 years have passed, you can go ahead and count and cast it that way. And then the list on the left-hand side here is all the folks that have some sort of criminal background and record and conviction, but go ahead and are still able to access the ballot in Pennsylvania. All right, here's our big Justin Timberlake moment here. So selfies in the voting booth. Folks that are on social media that kind of see this a lot. It is feel really good to show off the fact that you're engaged and that you cast your ballot, right? So in Pennsylvania, the law is, all folks have determined that the First Amendment does protect your ability to take a ballot selfie. However, you can only post yourself. You have to wait until you leave the polling place to actually upload that photo. And it's a violation of Pennsylvania law if you, in your photo, disclosed how someone else voted or was about to vote. So if you accidentally get someone who photobombed you in the background, that is a violation if you post that, because that is about looking at how they're about to vote. So in Justin Timberlake here in 2016, you see him taking that ballot selfie, and under Tennessee law at the time where he was casting his ballot there, he was violating the statute there because he posted a picture of him in the ballot box, which was not allowed. And he was not prosecuted, but given our current climate in terms of how everybody is a little bit more on alert about elections. Not sure how this would play out today in 2022. So if you are prone to ballot selfies, go ahead and post it after you get home or you're outside of the voting booth. And other quick note, I don't know how many folks work in New Jersey. New Jersey does not have the same interpretation, and there are no ballot selfies allowed in New Jersey. So folks that interact with individuals in Jersey, tell them no ballot selfies. All right, so here's different ways to get involved. So you voted, you did a great job of making sure all your friends and neighbors and family were registered and they got their vote out, but you want to do more. What are some ways you want to get involved more, and what are the ways you can? First, you can be a poll worker. Poll workers are wonderful human beings. They spend 18 hours a day, twice a year, making sure democracy grinds on in your neighborhood for you. And so that this is a huge, huge undertaking for these individuals, and they do, by and large, do a great job. It's really important to find folks that are interested in this work, because it helps increase access to the ballot for neighborhoods that have fewer poll workers. Fewer poll workers mean precincts closed or means longer lines, which then infringes on the ability to cast a ballot freely and fairly. The only requirements to be a poll worker is you have to be a registered voter in the county. You can't be a county employee or a government employee, and that you can work all of election day and attend training. The county has revamped their training process. They do a great job. It's a detailed packet that you're sent home with after training. And it is a really, really, really important role. If you're looking to register, there's a link here. But essentially the duties of a poll worker is you are just making sure that election runs smoothly, that voters can vote, that and one thing that I like to think about that can be humbling for someone, right? So that person sitting at the table, making sure that voter can vote, that is help instilling a habit. If it's an easy process, if it's a friendly process, and that makes it more likely that they're going to come back to vote again. If it's a hassle, if the line is long, if things are discombobulated, they're may be less likely to come back and cast their ballot again. So we really need really great people to step up and do this job, particularly folks that have language skills that in addition to English. Anytime that we have folks that are able to speak more than one language, these are highly demanded and highly sought after folks to get out there and work at the polls. All right, some other ways to participate. We are running up against 1:30, so I'll try and wrap this up quick here. Other ways to participate are, so engage with your candidates or other campaigns. So this is the political side, a little smidge, but I don't care how you do it, but it's a great way to get involved in the process. You can serve as a poll watcher, so someone who is making sure all the rules are followed within the precinct or the polling place. You can serve as a greeter outside as long as you're 10 feet away and not harassing anybody. You can help provide transportation to the polls for those who need it. You can canvass, you can phone bag, you can write postcards. All of those are ways to get involved with a candidate or a specific campaign. One way you can learn about the issues and the candidates, right? Just being an informed voter is really, really important. Some nonpartisan resources here are the Committee of 70 in Philly. They help build a ballot. So you enter your information in and they help you figure out what's on your ballot in advance of an election. They have some regular voter, nonpartisan info on lots of different candidates. The League of Women Voters, their primary goal is to increase access to the ballot as well. They have some good information on voting and issues as we get closer to the election. And then the last one, which is kind of like the Pollyanna one, but I think it's important, is that be a voting champion, right? So be a reliable source of voting information in your networks. Remind your friends to vote, remind them to register, remind your clients, remind your colleagues, and know the answers to questions. So basic questions, you don't have to be an expert, but how have you applied for your mail-in ballot, or where do I return my mail-in ballot? Does our town have a drop box? Those are all little ways that you can easily help make voting not seem so daunting. And the last little piece is making sure we're following trusted accounts on social media. So disinformation is a real thing. It's a huge problem, as we all have seen in the last couple of years, last couple election cycles. Don't share anything that is embedded or is not trustworthy. And so I'll just kind of close here with folks that do election research and studies have found quite literally the single biggest factor that influences voting behavior is encouraging a friend or a family member to vote. So you can get 1,000 text messages from a campaign. You can see a ton of high, really expensive profile advertising, but the single biggest factor that's going to determine whether or not a friend or family member votes is just being reminded by a trusted relationship person. So it can feel weird sometimes in our professional lives to talk about voting because people automatically tie it to politics, but it doesn't have to be. It's just about a civic duty, and like jury duty, right? No one thinks that jury duty is charged politically, but it's just one thing we do, and we do it to be good citizens. And so as you kind of navigate through your personal lives, this is maybe a little bit easier, but professionally, we want to make sure it is the same kind of conversation. And then let's see. Okay, that is all. The last screen here is just some links here to get share more information. Delaware County has totally redone their election website in the last two election cycles, and it's a plethora of information. You can see how many people vote in your town. You can see how many people vote in your precinct. It's really, really exciting to see that kind of access to information be spread. So that's your first stop. The second link here is just at the Department of State level, so some information statewide. That third link there is finding your elected officials and who is up for a re-election. That's through the Committee of 70 site. And then lastly, that's my email. If anyone has any like weird wrinkles or weird problems or wants to get involved but doesn't know where to start, please reach out to me. I love talking about voting, and I'd be happy to do so. So it's 1:30, so I'm going to wrap up here, and I guess I'll take a minute for questions, but I'm not sure how much time we have. I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Eileen, thanks so much. This was my second time hearing this presentation, and I still feel like I absorbed some new information. And I'm looking forward to being one of those voting champions that now has more information than I did before ever hearing you talk about this. So thank you so much. And I think will we get a recording too? Our staff could really benefit. Yes, we made an effort to record this. We're going to share it